Alright guys, welcome to another video on Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade. Now today's video is likely going to be my last one of the year because I will be off on holiday between Christmas and New Year, so won't be posting any content during that time period. So if I don't speak to you guys again, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and hopefully I'll see you guys back on the channel early next year. Okay, so to actually wrap up this year, I decided to actually do a character tier list. Now, I haven't actually done a character tier list so far on my channel yet, mainly because I was kind of always debating on what format of the tier list should I do. Should I separate out by color, or should I separate out by their roles? For example, like the DPS versus the tanks versus the supports, etc. But then what I decided is that no matter what role your character's actually in, at end of day, you are all competing for the same 5 spots on your team, or the 4 spots on your main team, plus one backup option. So no matter whether you're a supporter or DPS, you are kind of competing still for the same position. So for example, like if you are a really bad DPS, then you are probably going to be better off actually playing a supporter who's able to offer more damage above. Whereas if your supporting skill are not actually that good, then you may be better off by playing a stronger DPS. So at the end of the day, I didn't really feel like it's that necessary to actually separate out the roles themselves, because like I said, they are all at the end of the day competing against each other. So instead, the format I'm actually going to do is more kind of like a team building mindset. So what I'm going to do is not just show you guys the tier list, but also kind of briefly talk about how should you actually structure a team. What are the DPS you actually want to focus on, what are the supporters you want to bring for depending on different occasions, and then what are the alternatives, or maybe some of the more cheesy strategy on how to beat a stage through alternative methods, etc. Okay, so let me just briefly go through the definition of the tiers, and then I can actually go through every single one of them by itself. So starting off with the MVP, I think those are basically the best character in the game. It's mainly basically one powerhouse of each color. So I have red, blue, green, and yellow, and then 2 of the best supporter in the game. So normally the way it goes is that you definitely want to pick at least one, you know, DPS of the color the enemy is weak against, and then if you happen to have both of them or at least one of those supporters, definitely make sure they're in the team. And because you will sometimes be alternating between the different color DPS, if you actually purely talk about like usage or frequency point of view, you would actually find your 2 supporter, the 2 I listed out here, Blue Momo and Yaga. If you actually have them, you find them to be in your team far more consistently than even the DPS themselves. So that's kind of why I put them on the first tier, because they are definitely the strongest characters in my opinion. And then the next tier are what I call meta. They are basically going to be the rest of your first team. So depending on whoever you have filled out from your first row, you would then basically pick up the supporters, or Nobara is kind of the only damage dealer, and I'll talk about her specifically later on. But otherwise, you are basically then going to point out and pick out the best supporter for that stage, depending on the enemy mechanisms or what kind of strategy you want to go with. So that's basically kind of the first 2 rows, to be honest, basically make up like 90% of all of the teams I'm doing. So you don't actually need to like look any further than the first 2 rows if you don't want to, because they, like I said, they are pretty much gonna be your bread and butter for every single stage in this game. Then what I have on the third tier is going to be alternative DPS. So that is mainly going to be in the scenario where you don't actually have kind of the powerhouse of the color you actually want. For example, if you are going into the tower mode, for example, where all of the other colors are severely debuffed, and therefore you really want to pick the characters with the right color weakness or advantage against the enemy. And if you, for whatever reason, don't have one of them, mainly green, for example, green Gojo, or maybe like yellow incomplete domain Megumi, then you can pick an alternative from this role instead to kind of substitute out your main DPS. And then on the fourth tier, I have what I call kind of the cheese team. They are basically the more unorthodox way of kind of beating a stage. They normally take a lot longer because you're not beating the game how it should, but you are able to somehow get past it through some kind of cheeky method. So I will talk more about kind of what are the main 2 strategies. Basically, you have the counter attack strategy, and then you have the healing and stoning strategy there. So I will talk about that slightly over this tier as well. And then lastly, I have the backup. So basically, those are the characters who I feel like um they can be used, Vast majority of time, however, like look at how many characters are above them though. Like you, even though I can see in theory you can use them every now and then, but from actual usage point of view, it's very very rare that you actually bring them out onto your team. So that's kind of why I say them as a backup. And obviously, other than all of the characters here, there are also other characters who I didn't even bother ranking them purely because, well, one, I haven't really used them extensively, and I haven't seen anyone using them, so I don't think there's any like hidden gems here either. So you can, for vast majority of time, just ignore their existence in this game. Okay, so that's basically gonna be the way I'm gonna do the tiers. So let's start off with the top tier, which is gonna be the MVP. So I'll kind of already gloss over this. Basically, I have the DPS of each color. And then, well, I mean, Megumi is a bit of a special case, but I'll talk about that. And then I have the two supporters who, like I said, if you have them, they should be in every single team. So it's quite obvious who are the main DPS for red, blue, and yellow, which is going to be Yuta, and then two different versions of Gojo. Now, yellow is a bit of a strange one because in theory, Nobara is the actual DPS, so I could argue Nobara should be in this place instead of Incomplete Domain Megumi because Megumi is more of a debuffer. But the problem is the two actually hit very similarly, or their damage output is actually very similar in the sense that both of their skill 1, 2, and 3 are pretty bad. It's only their ultimate skill where you actually see a lot of damage coming on. And yes, Nobara do actually do more damage than Incomplete Domain Megumi by himself. However, because of the insane debuff Megumi is able to do, within the 3 or 4 turns his domain is actually available, if you actually add up the damage over those 4 turns versus the damage over 4 turns from Nobara, you will actually find out Incomplete Domain Megumi can do just as much damage doing those 4 turns. Because what is going to happen is that even your normal attack is going to do a huge chunk of damage inside his domain expansion. So that's kind of why um like even though I think that damage output is the same, I feel like Megumi should actually be the MVP for the yellow color purely because outside of pure damage, he's able to provide that support utility as well. So that's kind of why I pegged Megumi over Nobara here. But that's basically the reason here. But essentially, you are kind of picking the DPS of each color, okay? And then in terms of two supporter, I think it's kind of quite obvious. Blue Momo is like the best supporter in the game, like by far, because not only she's able to provide buff, but she can also provide some cheese utility in the sense that she have an evasion built into her own passive, and also she can actually reduce enemy ultimate gauge by 1, which is actually really really strong. It's like a stun, except for that, obviously the enemy can still do their normal attack, but also unlike stun, which can sometimes be missed because enemy have like resistance, like reducing ultimate gauge by 1, that's pretty much like unavoidable. So for some stages, you kind of need that in order to buy yourself 1 extra turn, and then within that 1 extra turn, you can actually break the enemy and actually kill him off, etc. So like the ultimate attack from Blue Momo is absolutely crazy, provides great amount of utility, and then on top of that, her skill 1 is able to apply debuff as well. Yeah, able to apply debuff as well. So that's kind of why, like, no matter which skill you use with Blue Momo, she's gonna work, which is kind of why she's very very nice. And then you have Yaga. Yaga kind of is like the best buffer on paper, even better than Momo if you actually add up how many turns, because Yaga's buff actually lasts for 4 turns. So if I'm purely talking about buffing point of view, then Yaga is probably going to be the best like supporting buffer if you ignore the utility that Blue Momo is also able to provide. And then on top of that, what is also very nice about Yaga is that even if you play him in auto battle, he would use his skill 3 rather than skill 2, which is not ideal, but his skill 3 is a debuff skill as well. So if you're actually playing Yaga within auto battle, he's still gonna work. So out of all the supporters, he's one of the few which can even work when you actually play him on auto. So that's kind of why I do feel like he deserves the spot on the first tier as well. Okay, then on the second tier, I already talked about Nobara. Nobara should, in theory, be the the poster girl for yellow color, but obviously Incomplete Domain Megumi beat her to that point, but she's still a very good character. She does fall off in the future though, so it's just kind of right now there are not that many good yellow DPS, so kind of like she still secures her spot as kind of the best damage dealer, like pure damage dealer for yellow, and that's kind of why I do feel like she deserves the spot in still being part of the meta. But do bear in mind that she would eventually be not as competitive when other future yellow DPS are gonna be rolled out into the game. Then we have Ghetto. Now, Ghetto is one of the few debuffers in the game. So if you're not going for buff, like Yaga or Nanami or Momo, etc., if you're going for debuffing, right now there's only two choices. There's like pretty much, well, actually no, there's this Toge as well, but still, like Toge is nowhere near as good debuffer as Incomplete Domain Megumi and Ghetto. Ghetto is not able to do as much debuff as Incomplete Domain Megumi is able to do. However, Ghetto is kind of able to do this on turn 2 rather than waiting for like an ultimate attack to be built up. So from that perspective, Ghetto does have his own niche. So that's kind of why I still think it's a very solid character. In some cases, you are kind of going into a battle with a 1 DPS plus 3 with full support. And basically, Ghetto is going to be one of those supporting characters because honestly speaking, there are not that many good buffing characters in this game, so sometimes you would have to play a debuffer. So Ghetto is definitely a solid alternative if you do not have Megumi. Then the next one we have here is Hanami. Hanami is the best damage reduction buffer in this game. Like period. Like all of the other characters that they are doing offensive buff, Hanami is the best one for defensive buff. So that's all you need to know. He will get even stronger in the future when Mahito is also in the game because them two actually make a really deadly combo. But even without Mahito, Hanami by himself is already like a solid character, like and the best one, like I said, in terms of damage reduction. So that's kind of why he's on this tier. Then we have Kaito and Toge. Kaito and Toge, they are really strong character, even though they only are rarity. One is able to provide continuous curse energy, one is able to increase ultimate gauge. Now, depending on what exactly is your team lineup and the strategy you want to do, for example, if you want to constantly stack buffs, then you want to play Kaito. Whereas if you want to get your ult early and actually potentially break the enemy, then you play Toge. But a lot of time, what I typically find in my teams that I will be playing at least one of them. So definitely do not overlook them just because they are rarity. They're very strong characters. And then we have two other buffers. They are not going to be as good as Blue Momo and Yaga, but like I said, a lot of the time in this game, you will often find yourself in a situation where you kind of need like 2 or 3 supporter characters. So you would definitely be ending up playing Nanami or Momo every now and then as well. Those two are the same in my opinion. Nanami is able to do a bit more damage, whereas the SR Momo have a bit more defensive capability with her evasion and also stun, so she can provide more of like a cheese strategy for certain harder stages, but both of them are definitely very good. So they're kind of equal in my opinion, and both in the kind of meta team. And like I said, vast majority of the time, like I think for like 90 or 95% of the content in this game, my typical team is gonna be 1 DPS of the right color. It could be Megumi or it could be Nobara for yellow. And then I will almost always have Yaga because I don't have Blue Momo on my account. And then I will basically pick 2 or 3 character out of those 4 here, the 4 R and the SR character here. And that is basically what I'm able to clear, 95% of the content in this game. Like even the hard tower modes, that's basically what I'm able to do it with. So definitely do not overlook this character just because they're not SSR. Okay, next tier down, this is more for when you do not have the right DPS of the color you actually want. So for red, what you can do instead is you have the red Yuji and the latest red Nobara. Both of them are able to do decent damage. They're able to provide a bit of support utility as well in terms of like buff and debuff. But vast majority of the time, you would be using them either as a second DPS to complement Yuta, or if you don't have Yuta because you missed out on the event, then you actually will be playing them as your main DPS. So that's kind of the red color. For blue color, I only have Jogo here, mainly because everyone is almost guaranteed to get Gojo from the redrawable ticket. So you don't really need like a proper backup for blue character. And considering you can also get Jogo from the Phantom medals, even though I highly recommend Hanami or Mahito in the future. But still, you are essentially going to get one blue DPS who everyone should have, and then another blue DPS everyone can exchange for free if they want to. So I didn't really feel the need of finding two alternatives for blue character. Then we move on to green characters. Green characters are a bit tricky, mainly because none of those three are actually that good, in all honesty. Um, you kind of have Yuji, who's able to do a really good single target damage. Then you have Mekamaru, who's able to do really good AoE damage. And then you have the SSR Nanami, who's able to do a combination of both of them. So basically, depending on the scenario you want, you kind of pick the right green DPS for that situation. But they are, in all honesty, all pretty average. It's only because we are seriously lacking good DPS, green DPS right now, that they are even in this tier. In the future, all three of those characters will be moving down the tiers when we have more other alternative options in the future. Okay, and then similarly for the yellow category as well. None of them I actually feel are that good. It's just right now there are not many other alternative yellow options, so that's kind of why I have to bring them in. You basically have SSR Toge, who is able to provide a bit of break and also debuffing ability. The debuffing is nowhere near as good as what Megumi and Geto is able to provide, so that's kind of why, even though he is a debuffer, a lot of time people forget about him, to be honest. He is able to provide a bit of like a nice utility in the sense that he can prevent one of your character from exiting the battle, which can be helpful if you try to 3-star clear a particular stage. But once again, just a DPS point of view, he is very average. And then you have Junpei, who once again, he's not really a DPS. So it's a bit of a stretch to say you ask them to be kind of your main yellow damage dealer. But still, Jumper is able to provide a bit of poison damage. He also have a bit of a niche in terms of he can actually apply attack nullification. So he can be interesting in certain stages. But like I said, in all honesty, when there are better yellow options, they will all be going down. Like all five of this card, the three green and two yellow, they will be going down further down in the list when we have better options in the future. Okay. All right, and then we move on interesting tier, which is kind of the cheese strategy. Basically, there's only two cheese strategy. There's the counterattack strategy and then the healing and stalling strategy. The counterattack strategy is quite obvious. Basically, you have Todo and you have Miwa. The idea is that Todo basically uses his best friend ability on Miwa. Miwa is able to taunt all of the enemy, and then what that's gonna be doing is that provided you have enough curse energy, which is kind of why you encounter that team, you will always see them paired up with Kaito to provide that curse energy. But essentially, what it's able to for you to do is that you are drawing off the attack onto Miwa, and then what you can do is just counter attack. And the way counter attack work in this game is that when you counter attack, not only you are doing damage, but also you actually prevent the enemy attack in the first place as well. So you won't be taking too much damage in the first place, provided you are able to counter attack. But because counter attack costs curse energy, that's kind of why you always have Kaito in the team. Okay. So, but this is definitely a suitable strategy for some of the harder stages because, like I said, you actually prevent the enemy from attacking you in the first place when you do a counter attack, and you kind of just slowly wear down the enemy. Now, in terms of the full team, like I said, you basically have this two plus Kaito. As for the last spot, normally you want to play a buffer so that your actual counter attack do more damage, so you wear them down a bit quicker. So normally you will see someone like Yaga, but if you're actually having trouble to stay alive because the enemy may be doing like an AoE damage rather than single target, then you can play Shoko as well to actually do a bit of healing. The other thing is like um what Todo is compulsory for counter attack team. Miwa is not compulsory. You basically can substitute her in for anyone else who's able to draw attack onto themselves. It's just that Miwa is the best choice because first of all, she actually have a counterattack status herself as well, if you want to use that skill. And second of all, her taunt actually lasts for 2 turns. So in terms of like curse energy efficiency wise, Miwa is the best choice for a counterattack team. So that's kind of what the reason I put Miwa here. But in theory, you can substitute her out for any other character who's able to just taunt as well. Okay, now in terms of the healing and stalling team. So basically this team is just like you never die and you just slowly wear the enemy out. You don't even get a chance to counter that, so it's gonna take even longer than this counter that strategy. But it does work. It just takes you like an hour every single time to beat a stage. Now obviously you need Shoko on this team because she is kind of like the only healer in this game. So you definitely need her. And then depending on whether the enemy is doing single target attack or AoE attack, you either use Green Panda or you would use this SR version of Kaito. So Panda is able to do draw attack and also damage reduction himself, which is perfect if the enemy only do single target. Whereas if enemy actually do AoE, then obviously you have the SR version of Kaito, which are able to do a lot of damage reduction. There's also Ijichi as well, and sometimes I would actually play Ijichi instead of the SR version of Kaito. Especially if you actually have to use the R version of Kaido in the same team as well. In fact, having said that, let me move Ichichi up this tier. I think like he deserves to be this tier. But yeah, so basically this is kind of your stalling and healing strategy if you do ever want to spend an hour on a single stage. To be honest, I vast majority of the time don't recommend people actually do that, mainly because even though you're able to cheese your way through like one particular floor, you will still be stuck on next floor unless you want to spend like an hour on every single floor afterwards. So it's just kind of not really worth it, and also kind of take out the fun of this game. So that's kind of why, even though it's viable, I personally wouldn't recommend it too much. And then last character I have on this tier, I haven't actually been using him much, but just looking at his kit, I feel he can provide a bit of a cheesy utility because he is actually able to reduce enemies' ultimate gauge, and there are only two characters I think right now in the game able to do this, which is like Blue Momo or the SSR version of Momo, or it's going to be this SR version of Togen. And because this is an SSR, a lot of people don't have it. So if for whatever reason you find yourself needing to not just stun the enemy but actually reduce enemies ultimate gauge, this is kind of going to be your only choice right now. So that's kind of why I'm going to put him in this cheese team. But I will be honest, I haven't actually been using him much at all. But yeah, so that's basically what I have on this fourth tier. And then the last tier are basically characters they're just bad characters, to be honest. Like not as bad as the ones who didn't even make it to the list, but they're just so bad compared to others. I don't really want to even like compare them because it's a bit like disrespectful to other characters. But basically, you have Camel. Camel by itself is not actually a bad character in terms of his damage output. But apart from damage, he just does nothing else. He only do pure damage. And then if you take a look at blue characters in this game, you either have Gojo, who everyone is guaranteed, and then you have Jogo, who everyone can exchange for free. Like I can't think of another scenario where you would need three blue DPS on the same team. I just literally can't think of any scenario like that. And like what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, in those cases, you're actually going to be better off rather than putting on Camo, just put another supporter, and you'll be better off. So that's kind of why I feel like he's just a bad character. Uh, yeah, nothing more to say about this. And then blue SSR Megumi, he's really bad as well. He is able to provide a bit of a utility in terms of stun, but his stun probability is even worse than his own R rarity version. So you're not going to use him for his stun ability. The other thing he's able to do is he's able to do a bit of like an AoE damage, but his AoE damage is worse than like this SR Mechamora. And so basically like he is a bit of like jack of all trades, but none of them is good. And I can't think of any scenario where you need one character to do an AoE damage and also stun at the same time. Because normally when you actually need to stun an enemy, that's against like a single boss. Whereas when you need to do an AoE attack, that's up against mobs. It's just very, very weird why you have this character trying to do both scenarios and not good at either one of them. So that's kind of why I just feel like he's a really bad character. Then we have this Red Maki. This Red Maki, for a certain time, she was the only red DPS. So if I actually created this tier list at the start of this game before Yuto's release, I can probably put Maki on like the second tier with third tier, for example. However, right now with so many other red DPS available, in comparison, Maki's damage output is just awful. Like I don't know what's going on with her scaling. I actually done a comparison of her damage scaling with the SR version of Maki, and the SR version of Maki have higher damage scaling. That's just ridiculous. Like obviously the SSR character have better raw stats, so the actual output is going to be the same. But if you purely look at the multiplier and the scaling itself, the SR version is better than the SSR version. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think like they just made a massive mistake of the numbers with this Red Maki. But yeah, as it is, she's just gonna be at the bottom of the tier. And then like I said, this SR version have actually better numbers but worse stats. But in terms of the actual damage output, she is going to be exactly the same as this red version, the SSR version Maki. So they can't belong on the same tier. And then this last spot, I actually have the R version Panda. This is not like you don't normally need a tank in this game, but out of all the tanks which are not limited to SSR, this is going to be the best one you would need. And I have actually seen him being played quite a few times by free-to-play players on the JP server. So, I even though I haven't really been using him myself, I know he can be a viable option. So that's why I kind of put him on here as a backup option if you do ever find yourself needing a tank.